everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening for the next and second to last of the year of the Portland Public Library and Southern Maine Conservation Collaborative's Sustainability Series. I'm Aaron Rosenblum. I am the Portland Public Library's Health and Science Librarian, and I will be your host this evening. Jess Burton, who normally joins us from the Southern Maine Conservation Collaborative, can't be with us this evening, so you're stuck with me. If you need anything or you're having trouble connecting, you can connect to me in the chat, I think by chatting to hosts and panelists, or directly to Portland Public Library is the name it's showing for me, and I will try to help out. Let's see. This is our, what do I usually say? I think this might be our 7th annual series with our two organizations, bringing you these sustainability talks. And we're already lining up some great stuff for next year. And I think I said second to last, but I think this is actually the last of the year. So the next one will be in January, and we'll get some information out about that soon. Before we go any further, I would like to offer PPL's land acknowledgement, which is a simple way of us showing our respect and a step toward correcting the stories and practices that have erased Indigenous peoples' history and culture, and towards inviting and honoring the truth. So Portland Public Library would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the occupied and unceded territory of the Wabanaki, the people of the place where the sun first looks our way, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We extend our respect and gratitude to the many Indigenous people and their ancestors whose rich histories and vibrant communities include the Abenaki, Maliseet, Mi'kmaq, Passamaquoddy, and Penobscot nations, and all the Native communities who have lived in Shuabunkeg for over 3,000 generations in what is now called New England and the Canadian Maritimes. We thank them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land and aspire to uphold our responsibilities according to their example. So, a little more housekeeping. There will be a discussion and Q&A after the presentation, but feel free to drop your questions into the chat or using the Q&A function if you see it at any time. So you can drop the question in as it occurs to you, but just know that we'll probably address most of them, or as many as we have time for after the presentation. So now, it's my pleasure to introduce Naomi Beal, who is the Executive Director and founding member of passivhausMAINE and a founding board member of the North American Passive House Network. Naomi embraces the challenge of developing passivhausMAINE as a sustainable organization through local, national, and international partnerships, and she lives in and joins us from tonight, windy and rainy South Freeport, Maine.
Shall I take it?
Sure, please do.
Thank you, Aaron, and welcome to everybody. I'm happy that we didn't have to drive out into the rainy night to have this gathering at my house anyway. It's pretty blustery. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Aaron, tell me if this is going to work. What do we see? Does that work?
Yep, now we see it.
Okay, great. So yeah, just start by saying thank you so much for having me, and thank you to Jess, who made the connection, Jess Burton, who I work with in another capacity, and it was really nice of her to make the connection for passivhausMAINE and this sustainability series. I applaud the work that the Portland Public Library is doing, and I'm really honored to be able to come and share what we do here at passivhausMAINE. So let me see how I can make this happen. Is this working? Do you?
It's advanced.
Okay, perfect. So this is just a little background about passivhausMAINE. I'll say we We've been around actually for a surprisingly long time when I think about it now, but casually we met. passivhausMAINE was a very loose organization from about 2011 to 2016. It was a group of builders and architects and other designers and engineers who are really just learning about this new kind of construction. And it was a sort of a series of site walks, basically, to people's projects, mostly around Portland and Bethel, and around about. So about 2016, we formed a 501c3. I transferred from sort of the chair of the board to executive director, and we've had a really kind of wonderful progression of development since that time. And just to sort of explain what's on our homepage, when you go to passivhausMAINE.org, you'll see these two images, passivhausMAINE and Retrofit Maine. Retrofit Maine is a nod to the overwhelming need to retrofit Maine and New England's small buildings. And I'll talk more about that later in the talk, but just to know that we have these two websites and these two programs. So I said before that we've been around for a long time, and I might be kind of self-centered in the way that I think about a new era of construction in Maine and a new understanding of the importance of buildings, not just as shelter, but as part of the energy solution. I do think of the Bright Built barn, which was built in 2008, as a sort of advent of this new sort of flashy, I mean, in this case, literally flashy kind of energy conscious construction. And this was my introduction to high performance building, as well as came into high performance building through the back door as a photographer. I was doing portfolio work for architects, including Kaplan Thompson Architects. And when they built the Bright Built barn, it was such a revelation for me and for many people, actually. This image and this project was featured in the New York Times. The lights that you see below at this point glowing green are, it's just sort of indicated when it's green, it means it's generating power. And it turned to orange and then red. The lights below the building when it was no longer generating and actually using energy. So it had this sort of high profile marker about what was actually happening in the building. And it was absolutely a net positive kind of building, very small with a large array, very well, tightly made and very well insulated with highest quality products and appliances. So that was, and that was back in 2008. And that was my image there, taken about this time of year exactly. I think it was early December. So that was a big step, and no surprise, but just a couple years later, and at the time that Bright Built barn was built and completed, then the drawings were being made for the Red House, built by what became Geologic. And Alan Gibson actually built the Bright Built barn in conjunction with Benson Wood. So these two projects are kind of linked. They're absolutely linked by the people who designed and built them. And then I think of them as the springboard. The Red House by Geologic is the first passive house building in Maine, certified, and that was completed back in 2010. So we have quite a long history of these kind of small, somewhat precious, high performance buildings. And I do think of these projects as the springboard for what is to come. So I know that this conversation is about carbon and how houses are part of our carbon solution. But I just want to start with a very basic description of passive house for those who maybe don't know exactly what passive house is. And this slide shows, miles per gallon for cars. Passive house can acts in that same way. It's a German energy standard, a voluntary standard that is based on measuring of energy used, very precise measurements. And when you build and design with those very precise measurements, it means that you can really make a judgment about what you're building, how it's performing. So passive house, you can see in this upper slide up here. I don't know, can you see my arrow? I don't know if you can.
Yeah, we can.
So the up here in this corner, those are the three metrics for passive house. That's it. It's very sort of simple in a way. Passive house says you can only have 4.7 kBTU per square foot per year. Very specific, very low energy model. And the air tightness is 0.6 ACH 50, which is a very low air tightness. And I'm not sure in this audience how familiar everybody is with that, but currently building code allows for 3 ACH 50. And so 0.6 is significantly lower than that. And the graph down below, code versus passive house, gives you a sense of the differences. So MUBEC code, these are insulation measurements or insulation amounts in windows, your slab, foundation, walls, and roof. And you can see MUBEC insulation amounts are not bad, but not very strong. And then the passive house, if you go to the passive house level, you'd have increased insulation across the board. The single family home that you see here was built actually way back. I think that was like 2011 or 2012 in Bethel by Maine Passive House, Jesper Cruz, who owns that. It's a great firm there. And that house has 4.7 kBTU per square foot per year. And so does this massive high rise in Boston, which is pictured down below, that is in construction right now. It's relatively close to getting done, but is the highest, largest multi-use passive house building globally. And it's right here in Boston, not in Maine, but it is in Boston. But the standard applies to both size buildings. And that's interesting because it's difficult actually to reach that standard for a small building. But in Maine, as I already said, we have our roots were in very small buildings, and the designers and the builders and the owners who were kind of brave and interested and curious and committed built houses to this highest standard without much context. And so, I'm just sort of giving an acknowledgement that the roots of passive house in Maine seem to have been in kind of fancy houses. However, the roots in Germany for passive house were never for single family homes. It was always for large commercial, multifamily office buildings and commercial buildings of all types on a very large scale. And not ironically, the standard was developed to help the transition off of Russian oil. 20 years ago, people were thinking about that for obvious reasons at this point. So just to say, there's been quite an evolution of buildings. And the reason that the larger scale is so interesting is because of the importance of buildings in our carbon equation. And this slide gives a little bit of information about that. Starting up here, you can see carbon by sector. This is a slide that was created by the Maine Climate Council. And here on the left, you can see that in Maine, a little bit different than the rest of the US, we have a very high percentage of our carbon emissions is from transportation. So we're a big state with a lot of space between our work and our homes and our community and our various communities. But houses and other commercial buildings account for a solid 30% of our carbon emissions. And additionally, this orange bar represents the creation of electric power. So Maine's got a pretty clean grid, not as carbon intensive as others, but the less power we use, the less of that 9% we need to use. So switching over to this other graph, which is half in German, and I apologize for that. But the heat, this red bar represents heating. In a standard house, and these are, our normal house, the heating demand is huge, and our total energy use is dominated by heat, especially here in Maine. A newish building looks more like this, slightly less. And I think, what we would call pretty good house, for those of us who know a pretty good house, our heating demand is reduced a lot. But relative to passive house, there's a lot more to go. So this graph just shows the difference between our existing building stock, basically, and the potential of passive house. Breaking down the buildings that we're going to have in the state in 2050, which is a bit of an artificial date, but that's what we're using for sort of measuring our carbon goals. We're looking to be net zero by 2050. We're going to have some new buildings, and we need to pay attention to those new buildings. But the existing building stock, in residential terms, 480,000 units, is all built to this old standard. So when we look at the totality of the buildings, we're going to want to have our new buildings be as carbon conscious as possible, as energy conscious as possible. And then we're going to have to turn our attention to the existing building stock and figure out how to reduce energy usage in our buildings. This next section, I'm just going to talk about some amazing buildings that have happened in Maine and why we really have been some leaders in some ways, even nationally. So right here in Freeport, we had the first LEED silver. LEED is, not great energy, but really interesting environmentally. And Taggart Construction here in Freeport strove for that standard. Also in Freeport, maybe coincidentally, maybe not, I don't know, was the first LEED gold home, just 1 year later. And then there's really a beautiful project also in Freeport that was a deep energy retrofit. That project was led by Peter Strost of Energy Circle and constructed by Warren Construction, designed by Scott Simons Architects. And all three of those entities continue, actually all of the builders and architects here continue to develop just really beautiful work in Maine. But those are very early examples of how we could go about building careful buildings, and a lot of lessons were learned. again, about the small buildings versus large buildings and the passive house implications. So those smaller buildings are challenging. In Maine, we have this spectacular array of academic buildings built to passive house standard. The first one was Friends School of Portland. That's a project that's really close to my heart. I was also a founding board member of the Friends School of Portland and was the board chair and building committee chair when we moved our campus from Portland out to Cumberland. And so in 2016, we opened the first part of Friends School of Portland, which is the front 2 sections. And in 2021, a 4 classroom addition was added to the very first passive house school in Maine, only the second one in the United States. And it was a very exciting development. And just the next year, Maine Coast Waldorf School in Freeport went ahead and built their high school, making it the first high school built to passive house standard in the States. And then it was just like this off and running. We had a Montessori school up in Belfast. Waynfleet School also added a huge addition to passive house standard. And then all of the colleges got in on the game. Bowdoin, Bates, College of the Atlantic, Colby just opened up some new dormitories. And then what was a huge mark of progress, University of Southern Maine, and you guys in Portland will know, that this really large building in, oh, hang on, I'm getting ahead of myself. Really large building down in just off the peninsula is the USM's dormitories and a student center. Having the public schools, the public university system, the sort of embrace the low energy, low carbon, low utilities costs, consistent and quality housing for their students was really wonderful. And then up here in the upper left is the example of the College of the Atlantic. There's a student and science center. And they just are in the middle of building a whole other set of dormitories as well. So what Friends School of Portland embraced, and I was just so involved with that process. I have to say the board, I was mindful of the fact that I was wearing 2 hats in that situation. I was wearing my passivhausMAINE hat and my Friends School of Portland hat. And I did not want to strong arm them into something that I felt really strongly about. And so we made an agreement in the design process that we would, rather than committing to passive house at the onset, we would make design decisions that wouldn't prohibit or wouldn't preclude passive house later in the design process. So just like beginning with site location, window proportion of window to walls, a series of appliance decisions and wall assembly decisions got us to the point at the very end of our design process that we actually had to make a choice to either go for certification and increase our insulation in the bottom of the building by just a little bit, or not do that and just go ahead and enjoy a perfect building that was like already a very beautifully designed, well-functioning building. But the building committee of Friends, with my leadership, but hopefully I wasn't like strong arming them too much. They decided to sort of be a leader and just take a stand and say, yep, we can do this. We'll do it. And just as a leadership role, they got their certification, their plaque is on their wall. When natural gas was put in Route 1, it like traveled right outside their driveway And we were able to say, no, thank you. We do not need any natural gas as part of this project. All of the infrastructure associated with that was not part of our expenses. And that was really great for the board in the moment. And it's a gift to the board in perpetuity in terms of the utilities costs. That line item for winter heating in the previous years and the other buildings was a real wild card. And having controlled expenses in that regard was great. And that is why all of the other private schools, when they had to build new spaces, we shared that, that was really publicly. This is a boon for any organization that's holding onto the building for a lifetime and who has a very tight budget, as all schools do. So schools in Maine, it's quite a remarkable cluster, actually. And we have some amazing leaders in design, Opal being one of them. Elkis Manfredi is not local, but SMRT did some work with, which is a big firm in Portland, did some work on that project as well. The next hugest section of building that was that is so important is our large scale affordable housing units. It's a huge amount of square footage. And I have to just give so much credit to our Maine State Housing Authority for taking a leadership role in the same way that Friends School of Portland did. They have consistently encouraged developers and housing authorities of all types to consider efficiency. They are not yet at the point of requiring it to be passive house, but so much of it is passive house anyway. The Maine State Housing Authority has adopted the stretch code. They require a higher standard than every other building in Maine. Portland, as I'm sure most of you know, Portland and South Portland also have adopted the stretch code, but it's only those three entities so far. This project that is over here is up in South Portland, designed by Kaplan Thompson Associates. It's the West End apartments, a beautiful set of buildings, really nicely done. And I like that image because it just shows what's finished and what's still to be built. And right now there are so many passive house, multifamily, affordable housing units in the pipeline. It's a really important work. However, drawing your attention to this 20,000 homes, that's the dirt that we have. That is the gap between the number of homes that we have and the number of homes that we need. Like right now, there's impetus to build a lot quickly right now. And I'm so grateful that Maine Housing Authority has prioritized efficiency and low carbon construction as part of that. And they're really facing that tension straight on, the tension between wanting quick housing and needing housing, and being mindful of not digging ourselves into a deeper carbon hole. So I really give them credit there. And then I just showing here the map. If you go to passivhausMAINE.org, we do have a map that shows all of the projects that our members have built across the state of Maine and also outside of the state, because many of our members who are based here in Maine have widespread reach, and they really have a leadership role right here in New England. So that's an interesting little map to check out. You can zoom in and see each individual project. They're sorted, as you can see, by type: single family homes, schools, multifamilies, dormitories, and retrofits. So reducing operational energy, which is what Passive House does so well, is super, super important. However, it's just an immediate question for those who've been in the industry for a long time. Like, okay, we have like added all this insulation to a building so that we don't have to burn fossil fuels. But what is that insulation made out of? Is the question that arose pretty early on for a lot of us. For instance, even at that the Friend School project, that extra insulation we put underneath the slab was foam. And that was, we were conflicted about that. Well, extra foam, is that really necessary? We went for it to sort of like go all the way, but it was with some hesitance. You can see this graph on this side. It was designed by the Architecture 2030 group and in 2019. And I love to demonstrate how quickly things change. So you can see here, polystyrene, closed cell spray foam, the mineral wool, all of these are carbon intensive in the way that they're made, the materials from which they're made. Fiberglass, that is, still a carbon positive, though, if it's well installed, is a good option. Dense packed cellulose is carbon negative. Cork is not a product that we have much access to. Hempcrete, also not so much. Straw bales, we have some amazing builders here in Maine using straw bales on a fairly small scale, so single family home. However, this list here doesn't even mention wood fiber. And I am so grateful. If I could have a whole talk just about Timber HP, because I love this product so much. It is based on a German product. For years, we've been importing Gutex and Styco, other kinds of wood fiber insulation that has been manufactured in Germany, put on a boat and shipped over here at great expense, at prohibitive expense, I'll say. Only the most dedicated and deep-pocketed projects use this product. However, as Timber HP will tell you, Maine has so much wood chips right now. We just have a glut based on, diminishing paper production. And our energy is a lot less than Germany's. These guys are in Madison. They have taken over one of the existing paper mills, outfitted it with equipment from Germany that was shipped over a year ago, I'd say. And they're in the process of rebuilding that plant. It's a really good company, great company. They brought on some of the original managers and engineers of that mill, and they are using Maine's forest byproducts, lumber byproducts, to create in this image, you can see down here, this is a blown in cellulose that is a consistent, clean substitute for the ground newsprint that we see as a blown in product. They also have a bat, which is represented here, that's closer to what you would see as a fiberglass. It's like not rigid. And then the third product is a rigid board that will be a serious industry disruptor for the blue board. It will be cost competitive, less than rock wool, than a mineral wool bat, and so much easier to work with, made right here in Maine, and carbon embodied product. That's huge news for Maine. It's huge news for our buildings. And I could talk about that product all day. passivhausMAINE actually had a tour up there a couple weeks ago, we took a bus up to Madison and got a tour of the plant, and it's super exciting. Another sort of homegrown celebrity, Pretty Good House. I mentioned it earlier, but this is a book. I both hate and love this this book and the concept of Pretty Good House, because these are all it's all passive house principles broken down to single family home applications. And so it's I don't know if people on this call are familiar with the book or the concept, the website, and the speakers. Dan Colbert lives in the West End, and Emily's up in Cumberland, Mike Maines is up in near Augusta, and Chris Briley of Bryburn is right there in Portland as well. So it's a great book, a great resource, has sort of taken the construction industry by storm for single family homes. They're a great resource and good book. Right. So Maine's situation. All those pretty good houses are striving for pretty good houses. In fact, what Maine has is the oldest population in the country and the oldest building stock, and the highest proportion of buildings that are fueled with number 2 heating oil. And I could say, even if you're only burning wood, it's just so inefficient, such a big effort, and so uncomfortable. And this is my house that we're looking at right now, with those 2 chimneys burning at full blast, trying to keep the house warm. I'm grateful to say that we have shifted our systems to a heat pump system, a ducted heat pump system that is much more comfortable and much more efficient. But living in a space like this is part of what brought me to just really prioritize retrofits in the passive house work that I do. Low carbon housing is an equity issue. People who are living in buildings like this, old farm buildings, or our old village buildings, they're underbuilt, wood framed, not insulated, buildings that are vulnerable in extreme weather, even as what we have right now, extreme wind, extreme rain. And retrofitting these is it's an equity issue, and it's actually totally my motivation with the Retrofit Maine program that we have. I love this image because it's colorful, but it's just so clear. Like, if we were in person, I would say, which building was retrofitted? You can see the building that's blue is as cold, the outside of the building is as cold as the cars that are parked on the street. All of the other buildings on that street are glowing with the heat that is escaping. It is unsustainable, I guess is the point. There's a lot of reasons why we have so many buildings that are not yet retrofitted. There's a series of barriers listed here. It's extremely expensive. And even if you have money, there's not very many people to actually do the work. And if you have the people to do the work, it takes a really long time. Generally, you're leaving the building for 6 months or so to do a whole house retrofit. Expertise is lacking, feels like a strong word, but it's not. Like, it's tricky work. You want to be careful. You want to make sure that you understand the building science between when you're applying insulation and barriers. And then this access to low carbon products, which has shifted, I'm grateful to say, with the timber HP product, will really make a big difference. However, the benefits are huge for us here in Maine and everywhere, but especially here in Maine because we have those three extremes. The benefits of having healthy buildings and healthy building materials used in our house. The benefits of having resilient buildings in extreme weather like we have today, extreme cold, extreme snow, extreme heat, extreme humidity. The lower energy costs obviously are awesome. And then being fossil free, avoiding the carbon emissions associated with fossil fuels. All of those benefits are, it's a bit of a silver bullet. If we could nail down retrofits in a really wide scale, proactive way, it would have such profound impact on Mainers across the state. I had somebody do a report for us to guess how quickly would we have to retrofit in order to meet our 2050 goals and simultaneously have some impact on the grid. And the numbers are staggering. It's just staggering. How are we going to be able to do that? How are we going to be able to weatherize / retrofit 2,700 homes in the next 2 years? It's a lot of work. It is a little bit overwhelming. And we at passivhausMAINE and others across the state are working on this challenge. The Climate Council's Maine Won't Wait has established these steps you see in the upper left for their goals, which are kind of stacked with heat pump technology, which is important. It's very important, actually. However, without all of the envelope addeds, the additions, I should say, you get a partial fix. You have perhaps low costs and low carbon emissions with the heat pumps, but you still have wet, or you still have vulnerability to wind whipping through your house, or you still have an unhealthy interior air quality. So I totally applaud and appreciate and support the heat pump technology and the programs that are encouraging and incentivizing that. But working on the envelope is truly our big challenge, our really big challenge. Just having a sense here of where we are relative to the Paris Accord, relative to our 2080 goals. And, we're getting there, but not super fast. And it's a challenge, which we're all working on. So I'm just sort of stating here, the Maine Climate Council goals are really necessary and they're ambitious. And they're just really important to strive for. Sometimes people are like, well, what can we do? Right. And a lot of it is like, what can we do in our own house, which is really, really important. And a lot of that is dictated by your own personal resources, which is challenging sometimes for a lot of people. But at your local level, there is important work to be done. And Portland sort of is a different scenario. You had the Citizens Initiative for the New Green Deal and the standards that are the building codes that are set in Portland. It's really, I understand the motivation for those. I know they're complicated now. Portland was brave and moving forward, but there's still a lot of lessons to be learned about citizen action at the local level. But stating the urgency and telling your town councilors and telling your neighbors that these things are important is great. Having a town carbon assessment as a baseline is really important. This for Portland is not relevant. These two things, if our listeners are in Portland alone, you already have these things. Exemplary municipal projects is a great opportunity that Portland is just looking at right now. And then these collective programs, Solarize, Weatherize, citizens supporting actions like that is helpful. At the state level, there's other, ways to be involved. Legislation is important. Pay attention to your local reps. What are they working on? Building codes are important. I also sit on the energy technical assistance group for the MUBEC board. We're discussing the next stretch codes, amongst other things. Building codes are really important. Commercial buildings do not go above and beyond out of goodwill, usually. Friend School did, other private schools did, but all those big commercial buildings in Portland did not. Incentivizing EMT and Maine Housing do a good job with their programs. I think there's more work that could be done, especially regarding retrofits and weatherization programs and incentives for upgrades of appliances, etc. That's all really basic low-hanging fruit that can be done. Overwhelmingly, do I have a slide? I don't. As of 2020, according to a national assessment through ACEEE, Maine ranks number 16 in terms of their attention to efficiency in the built environment, or actually across the board, and carbon reduction. Number 16, I think that they're redoing that assessment this year, and I think that we might do better because there has been a lot of progress in that at the state level through the Maine Climate Council. Talking about exemplary projects right now in Portland, I'm so excited. I love the museum. We've been longtime members. I'm so excited by the expansion and the development of, this new kind of statement building. But in all of the plans that I've seen, I have not seen mention of the energy usage associated with the museum. And it cannot be an exemplary building without addressing the energy usage and the carbon. I think this down here there's a lot of CLT and engineered timber products, which is super important and wonderful. But there's a lot of room in a museum to have very controlled energy. And I would love to see the people of Portland rise up and insist on energy being part of the conversation. The rest of my talk is sort of more general about passivhausMAINE. And so I think this is actually a kind of a good place to stop for questions. And then Aaron, maybe we just reserve another 6 minutes or so for me to wrap up. But questions about the content, I haven't clicked to see exactly what those questions are, but maybe I can answer some of them.
Sure. I don't know. You could leave your screen shared, or you might want to.
I can close that.
Share it for now. Not that I don't like looking at the designs for the museum. I like looking at the designs for the museum, and I have one that I like the best, but I'm not going to say.
Do you? Yeah.
Yeah. So we have several questions that did come in. And I'm sorry to say the chat wasn't working for everybody, but now it should. But the Q&A module has worked throughout. So we got a question about air tightness. And I share this concern just from conversation with folks involved in some kinds of building and retrofitting of old buildings, maybe not to these standards. Anyway, what about the idea that you need an airflow from the outside to go through the house to keep air refreshed, is the question we received. And I would just ask, are we still sure that air tightness is always good, or how do you get around the fact that you might want air exchange?
You always want air exchange. Absolutely. Yeah. So that's a great question, because it's so common, and I'm happy to answer it. Yeah, when you reduce the air tightness to 0.5 ACH50, it's assumed and understood by people that are building houses like that, that there's a systematic, mechanized ventilation system, heat recovery ventilation system. Absolutely. And when we talk about, I mean, you really have to think about, when you talk about air infiltrating through the walls for you to breathe, this is what we're talking about: terrible air quality. It's slipping through rotten insulation, remnants of mice, et cetera, for you to breathe. That's not good. That's not what we're aiming for. So to say that buildings don't need to breathe, people do. That is the quip that is the high performance building people say.
Okay, sure. So it's airtight, and then you are choosing to circulate the air as much or as little as you want for air you actually want, I guess.
Well, I mean, there's absolutely ventilation code,
Right.
You know, the minimums for fresh air, but that's a priority. In one of these tight buildings, it's a priority to have ventilation, fresh air coming in, preheated from the stale air going out. That's part of the efficiency of it, actually.
Cool. All right. And another one I think is probably shared by a lot of folks. And you mentioned sort of equity and some related topics, but do you have to be well off to afford to build one of these homes? And we have some other ones on retrofit later. So for now, I guess, new construction, should we assume this is the most expensive possible way to build a house, or?
No, I mean, right now, every single house that you're building is crazy expensive, right? I mean, there's no cheap house right now. And arguably, you know, it depends on the way that you go. Some people say there's, let's say, a 5% premium or something, you know, that you're substituting some mechanicals for some other mechanicals. For instance, you don't need a big furnace system. Instead, you have the ventilation. Air sealing is not generally an expensive part of a building for a new build, if you know how to do it. So I would say it's negligible extra cost. It's some little bit of extra upfront cost in exchange for, as the Friends School discovered, long-term savings for the life of the building, and comfort and resilience, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. I mean, I'll just jump in with one there that I think will come up as well, where you know, exchanging higher upfront costs for long-term savings requires having capital upfront, right? So are there mechanisms being discussed or even just dreamed about or in place? I mean, there are currently some rebates if you install, you know, heat pumps and this and that.
Yeah.
But on a broader level, on a sort of passive house level, what are some routes to get the capital out there so that people could make these choices to save long term?
Yeah, I think that's in my list of things that people can do. I mean, I certainly am championing at Efficiency Maine Trust and the legislature, and have many conversations with Maine Housing to make it as easy for people to do the right thing as possible. But I mean, the building codes right now, the sort of base building codes, are so much better than they were even 4 years ago. And those codes will increasingly help, you know, people do the right thing.
Sure. Yeah. So we have one that says, it's great to emphasize carbon embodied retrofitting products, but isn't the urgency such that it's better to use easier to use and currently available products than to not act? If you can retrofit your house today, but you don't have the HP, legislation yet, shouldn't you do it?
In fairness, those products will be available in like 4 months. So we don't have to wait.
I added that part. The person asking didn't have that.
Right. I mean, I think it's debatable, honestly, using fossil fuel products like loading up with foam. I think it's debatable whether it's worth it to do it right now or wait. That's a really heavy carbon load. And as I say, I mean, those products will be available shortly. We don't have to wait. Maybe the more general question is, do we wait for the perfect before doing something? And I agree with that, philosophy. Philosophically, we don't need to wait for all pieces to be in place before acting at all. But perhaps there's other things, other projects in your home to do before that project. Yeah.
Okay. We have a couple of related questions. I think pointing out to the fact that Mainers are pretty self-sufficient and are DIYers, and wondering about how Mainers can get started on this work themselves. What can average homeowners do? And the related question also just says, how can homeowners get started on a retrofit, and what are the economics in terms of payback, etc. And there's a questions here of maybe there could be trainings at community colleges, maybe there could be free workshops to teach people to do some of this stuff. How are we going to train workers? I think vocational work. And the only thing I'll tag on to that long list is, I already forgot it already. So just that long list.
Okay. So yeah, as I mentioned, having trained people is a huge barrier to getting this work done. And the more that people can do on their own, I suppose, the better. And the more trainings we have for even DIYers, the better, because you don't want to make mistakes that are kind of devastating for your building, and that there is potential for that. If you seal it up and you don't ventilate, that's really not good. If you seal it up with something that's not breathable at all, there's potential for rot out. So buy Dan and Chris and Emily and Mike's book. That's a good place to start in terms of understanding. My next slides are all about passivhausMAINE's trainings, which everybody's welcome to do. We are talking about designing for homeowners, also important building science based understanding of how to approach projects in your own house. The state's trying, like seriously working at training people so that we all have a better understanding. And as much as I was going to say, as much as I love the independence and sort of feisty DIYing of Mainers, also have to be super smart. And I have all the faith in the world that Mainers can also be super smart about the retrofits that they do in their own buildings. I honestly do. I know some people despair when the code enforcement officers look at some projects, and it's worrisome. But I think with the right information and the right tools and the right materials, Maine has just huge potential to have a massive retrofit movement. That's what we're working on.
Yeah, and I'm glad we've landed on retrofit a bit. Many of us, especially with changes in the housing market, especially with the possible end of the lowest interest rates anyone ever saw and can expect to ever see again. Here I am. I don't expect to be in a different house anytime soon. So that retrofit stuff becomes really important to those of us who are unlikely to build a house or even to move into a different house. I do wonder about, I assume the answer is we've thought of that and it's in our calculations, but I wonder about, so if 25,000 houses a year got retrofitted in Maine, about the volume of old building material waste that is coming out,
Yeah.
which is already sitting in our walls, I guess. But I just, yeah, I guess that's been calculated in. It's still worth doing all this, even though it creates a very large amount of waste that has to go somewhere.
I see that question being in two parts. Number one, construction waste. That's a huge issue. Sarah Nichols at NRCM has been working on that issue, that critical issue. I think it might come up in legislation this year to, I don't want to put words in her mouth and the work that she's doing, but there's, that's a big deal. Like, how much can we recycle? How much is actual garbage? How much is really toxic? How much isn't? And part and parcel with that question is a really interesting question to me, and that is the weighing of raising a building versus retrofitting, and how does the carbon counting, if we put a value on the carbon and the embodied carbon associated with that already built building, how does that change the formula when we're deciding about destroying versus retrofitting? And I think that's really going to be a increasingly more complicated question, because right now it's just, previously has been quite easy to just say, get rid of it, let's start new. It'll be faster, it'll be cheaper. And existing, how much is that infrastructure already worth in place? I think that conversation is complicated.
Yeah, and that touches on a question we had, which was, is there a big difference in cost between building new and retrofitting? And it sounds like the answer is, it depends when you ask.
Is it before you're counting carbon or after? I mean, that's obviously so specific to each project. I can't answer that exactly, but I know that there are complicated retrofit projects. I mean, the project that we've been championing is in Lewiston. passivhausMAINE has had a project that we've had our eye on for a long time. We've invested our own money in the engineering to sort of make an assessment about its sort of bones. And it's a great building, but it's a triple-decker building. It is 3 units at 3,000 square feet. It's not big enough to qualify for much of the housing funds that are available for multifamilies. It's too small for developers to invest in. But meanwhile, like, triple deckers are such a huge part of our building stock. And this building is, in desperate need of some work, but it's solid right now. How do we justify making that, like, the ROI in a narrow definition isn't there, but it's real housing right now. It exists. So these are hard. We have to change the way that we make decisions about if it's worth it or not, if the ROI plays out.
Sure. All right, and I think we have one more in the chat, and then maybe if you want to go back to your other slides here to show, but we have how will carbon embodied products compare in cost to higher carbon options? I'm assuming latter are cheaper, but maybe not.
No, the big news with Timber HP is that it's much cheaper. I forget what the real numbers are, but cheaper than mineral wool. Rock wool is a very popular product, but it is less expensive than that, perhaps slightly more expensive than blue board, but the advantages are enough that they're convinced that that's not really going to be an issue. It should be cost competitive on any project.
And presumably, if the cost of carbon-based fuel and energy keeps rising, and those things are intensive in creating them, then those products are going to get more expensive, assuming they pass that on to the consumer.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Or if you're counting carbon in a different way, and what's the embodied carbon of the,
Right. Oh yeah. I mean, I just mean, literally, if it
and
takes 10
literally, yeah.
gallons of diesel to make, X amount of fiberglass batting, that it's literally costing Corning more to make that with
Exactly.
literal carbon emissions.
Yeah, exactly.
And then they're going to sell it to you for more because they had to buy more fuel to run whatever they're running.
Yeah.
I mean, those are obviously totally off the cuff examples, but anything that takes a lot of carbon to make is going to get more expensive, probably, I guess.
I think so. I hope so.
Okay. Yeah. So did you want to sort of reshare if it was more slides?
Sure. Yeah. Let's see. Okay. So we left off at the museum, and I was going to carry on to some sort of housekeeping things about passivhausMAINE. passivhausMAINE is hiring. We're hiring a training director for our trainings, and we're hiring a retrofit Maine project manager for a design contest for that triple decker I was just talking about. So anybody who's in the built environment, go to passivhausMAINE.org and check out our job listings there. I wanted to give a special shout out to our Builder Code training series. This is a program that's been supported with the Harold Alfond workforce training funds. And stay tuned for a big announcement tomorrow about those trainings. Also will be in the news. But we have a training coming up Friday in Fairfield. We have another one in Brewer. I think that's the end for this year. And then next year, we'll be rolling out a series of trainings. The Builder Code training is aimed at traditional builders reaching the new building codes, which are becoming increasingly stringent. And we've had really nice response to that training. Builders are interested, excited, and dedicated, I think. I just feel really optimistic about it, about the training, our training, about other people's trainings, and about Maine builders. And then additionally, shout out for passivhausMAINE's Winter Forum being held this year in Freeport at the Hartseekit Inn, February 10th. There will be sessions and information for builders, architects, homeowners, engineers, developers. Well, there'll be a vendor expo and series of sessions. Good information for everybody. I wouldn't really be doing my job as the ED of a nonprofit if I didn't give a shout out to all of our sponsors. And our sponsors really do make our work possible, make it possible for me to do what I do, and all of the people that work for us. I'm really appreciative of them. And then even just further, if you've heard anything that you are inspired by or interested in, tonight we're in just after our Tuesday giving and supporting the nonprofits in our lives. passivhausMAINE is absolutely receiving donations gratefully to help us continue the work that we do. So thank you to our sponsors and to our members and to our supporters. And then our final slide, which I should have put up a little bit earlier, but yeah, thank you for hanging in there and being with me tonight, and being interested in the built environment, and being interested in Maine's ingenuity and commitment to a healthy future for us and for our children, and for our environment. And I just really do like that pie chart. I just think it's funny, and was designed by a guy who's committed himself to embodied carbon and his work at New Frameworks and Builders for Climate Action. So that's all from me, unless we want to take a little more time for my little straw poll that we were talking about.
Oh, yeah, sure. We made it. We might as well do it. I like the pie chart too. And first of all, but thank you for doing that. But Naomi had a poll which we don't usually do with this Zoom poll tool. So let's see if folks are up for it. Do you want to set it up for a minute?
Sure. I'll preface this by saying some of the work that passivhausMAINE does is lobbying is strong because it's really just me, and the work that I do promoting good policy is not the bulk of my work, but something that I've been thinking about and talking about with a lot of others is as part of our kind of path to net zero and part of encouraging individual homeowners to do the work on their houses that they could do. I'm thinking about suggesting a energy audit or assessment at points of sale. And so we, Aaron nicely put together this little poll. So if I could just sort of gather what this crowd thinks about that idea. So you go ahead and spill that if you want.
Okay, I'm going to press launch, and then I think folks will see it.
So
live, are you seeing the live view of the answers? I am. It's running yet.
Yeah. If anybody,
yeah, let us know if you can actually see it.
Yeah, is it clear? I don't know. I guess right.
There we go.
Oh, great.
I got a couple of responses. That's nice. Oh, some more coming in. Thank you, folks. Let's see.
Give you a couple more minutes, and then definitely put in the chat or the Q&A if you have questions about it. I'll tell you, I have more thoughts about it. I'll give you some reasons why I think it's really important. Number one, I think there's a transparency issue that is an equity issue, to let people know what they're getting into when they buy a house. That's a really good thing to have. In addition, it's just a moment, that transition moment to assess our building stock. It just creates more data for us to know where we are on our path to zero in terms of individual buildings. And it's a moment to actually get that work done. And it's sort of incentive maybe for people who are selling to actually do the work so that it has a better chance of selling. There will be pushback, I think, from realtors. I wish there would be a realtor on the line right now who would speak to that.
Well, we've got, I shared the results back out. So it looks like we had mostly yeses and a little bit of maybes for buyers and sellers. And then legal requirement, we had a couple of folks who said no. So maybe it should be voluntary and not a legal requirement. But yeah, that's really interesting. I look forward to sort of seeing where that goes.
Yeah, was there another comment in the chat?
Oh yeah, let's see. And yeah, in the recent market, many buyers had to forego an inspection to make a competitive bid. This would have to be rolled out in sensitive fashion to not harm buyers. Yeah, it's just such a funny moment to sort of add anything to the process. I think that's an interesting comment.
This would, in my mind, in my imagination, and how it's been rolled out in other states, it would be something like the miles per gallon sticker that we got on the car. It would not be an extra step for the buyer. It would be a requirement for the seller.
Right. So you might just see it even in the MLS listing.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So in fact, considering that you're having to make a crazy cash offer and not have an inspection, you'd actually have a little bit more information.
A little more information
before making your crazy cash offer with no inspection.
Yeah, that's the thought.
Yeah, could be good. Still wouldn't know if there's like, who knows, whatever. It's so scary buying a house now. Anyway, all right.
The housing market is pretty bananas for sure.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you for trying that poll out on us. And thank you to all of our attendees, and thank you, Naomi. Again, we'll be back in January with our next sustainability series program. We'll have news out about that, hopefully on the PPL website and the Southern Maine Conservation Collaborative website pretty soon. And I hope everyone stays dry and warm and that the power stays on.
Yeah, I'm so grateful it did. We were kind of prepared for the possibility that it didn't.
Yeah, we were worried, but we made it. Yeah, and so unless you have any other parting words, yeah, thank you.
Only to say thank you very much for having me. It's great to be able to share what I have. I appreciate the participants and sort of participating in that poll. That was helpful, and I love all the questions. And feel free to reach out to me or passivhausMAINE at any point with other questions. I'm always happy to chat, and keep an eye out for the trainings, which are across the state. Geographic diversity is a key for us in that, from York to Presque Isle is where the trainings are scheduled, and keep an ear out tomorrow for a big announcement about
Great.
those.
We'll look for that. Everyone have a wonderful night.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.